Mr. Ashed said that aliens were equally curious about humanity and were seeking to understand the fabric of the universe. Ashed said cooperation agreements had been signed between the species, including an underground base in the depths of Mars where there are American astronauts and alien representatives. Now again, this guy is the former head of Israel's Defense Ministry's Space Directorate. So he's not just some goof. Now, Ashed goes on to say, there's an agreement between the U.S. government and the aliens. They signed a contract with us to do experiments here. Now, Ashed added that President Donald Trump was aware of the extraterrestrials' existence and had been on the verge of revealing information, but was asked not to in order to prevent, quote, mass hysteria. Now, they've been waiting until today for humanity to develop and reach a stage where we will understand, said the general, in what the spaceships are, referring to the Galactic Federation, which is an odd name, isn't it? Something out of Star Wars or something, or Star Trek. But the White House and Israeli officials did not immediately respond to NBC News' request for comment. In fact, Sue Go, who's a spokesman for the Pentagon, declined to comment. Now, that's an interesting way to put it, declined to comment. She didn't laugh it off. She didn't say it was ridiculous. She said, I know nothing about this. She just declined to comment to NBC News. Now, Ashed's ideas are spelled out in more detail in a book called The Universe Beyond the Horizon, Conversations with Professor Chaim Ashed. It's a book by Hagar Asani, published last month. Now, Ashed, who oversaw the launch of numerous Israeli satellites into space, said he was only speaking now because attitudes were changing and people seemed to be more receptive. If I had come out with what I'm saying today 5 years ago, I would have been hospitalized, he told the Hebrew publication. Today, they're already talking differently, and I have nothing to lose. I've received my degrees and awards. I'm respected in universities abroad. Now, back in May, President Trump said, space is going to be the future in both the terms of defense and offense. We're now the leaders in space, and he was presented with the official flag of the newly created branch of the military called Space Force. You remember that. Now, its focus, along with Space Command, is on space as a military domain for the U.S., preserving satellites, communications, and a focus on geopolitics in the new terrain. Now, Nick Pope, who used to investigate UFOs for the British Ministry of Defense, described Ashed's remarks as extraordinary. Now, Pope says, either this is some sort of practical joke or stunt to help sell his book, perhaps something has been lost in the translation between Hebrew and English, or someone in the know is breaking ranks. Pope also said that the UFO conspiracy community was excited, but the questions remained, including whether or not Ashed was speaking from direct personal knowledge and experience, or whether he was just repeating something that he had been told. There's still a lot of missing pieces to the puzzles here, said Pope. When somebody like that speaks out, you have to listen. The former head of Israel's Defense Ministry's Space Directorate. This is no dummy, folks. And he's coming out. Now, is he just trying to promote his dopey book? Maybe. But this is a guy with a lot of standing in the world, in the government. Why would he come out with this if it wasn't true? Number 2, out of Esquire magazine. And this is Dateline, East Coast of the United States. Now, you may have seen this photo. In fact, it was passed on to me by people on Facebook. I had seen the photo. I had planned on doing the podcast on this and other factoids, okay? But the U.S. intelligence community has known about this for 2 years. And what is it? It's a photo of a motionless, cube-shaped UFOs. And again, it was released by the U.S. government. An unclassified image that's reportedly been circulating among U.S. intelligence agencies shows what appears to be unidentified aerial phenomenon. There's that UAP, an acronym, the Pentagon's term for UFOs. Now, the object in the photo has been described by U.S. officials as silver and cube-shaped, according to a report from The Debrief, which first shared the image. Now, this leaked photo dates back to 2018 when it materialized in an intelligence report from the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force, UAPTF, another acronym, okay? The Department of Defense's official unit that investigates UAP sightings. Yes, this thing really exists. There really is a organization in government called the UAPTF, the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force, and they're a division of the Department of Defense. Again, don't trust me. Look it up yourself. Now, in August, the Pentagon approved the establishment of the force as the first on-the-books government UFO program since the 2000 era lost its funding in 2012. Now, multiple sources confirmed with Popular Mechanics magazine earlier this year that the unit remained active in secrecy even after its shuttering. According to the debrief, the UATPF has briefed government and military officials on UAP matters for the last 2 years, and the newly surfaced image appeared in a report issued by the task force during that time. Now, the debrief, which is a publication, the debrief's Tim McMullen, a contributor to Popular Mechanics as well, learned of the photo's existence from a defense official who has been on the verge of being in a position to have multiple access to UAPTF's intelligence reports. Now, 3 other government officials confirmed with McMullen that the photo, which was shared on a secure network by the U.S. Intelligence Committee, comes from a 2018 task force report. A military pilot reportedly encountered the object while flying over the Atlantic Ocean on the east coast of the U.S. in 2018 and captured it with their personal cell phone. Now, it's likely that a backseat weapons system operator on an FA-18F Super Hornet took the photo, which McMullen calls inverted and bell-shaped and describes it as having ridges or other protrusions along its lateral edges extending towards the base. Now, it's possible that the object may be a GPS dropsonde. Okay, that's a sensor on a parachute that provides information on the vertical profile of a storm. But as McMullen points out, and confirmed with an atmospheric researcher, the actual dropsonde doesn't appear in the photo, just the potential square-coned parachute. And that would obviously have to be an aircraft above the object to drop it, and there's no such craft visible in the image. Is the object a research balloon? Probably not. 2 defense officials told McMullen. Now, pilots who encountered the object described that, unlike a balloon under similar conditions, the object was completely motionless, seemingly unaffected by ambient air currents. Now, while we await further details about the mysterious object in the photo, it continues to be a busy time for the advent and disclosure of UAP research. Now, remember this, and I talked about this on a previous podcast. Back in July, the New York Times article that featured former Senator and former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, who's a former Nevada Senator, who was instrumental in funding the government's original UFO program back in the early 2000s, said he believes crashes of objects of unknown origin may have occurred and that retrieved materials should be studied. Reid said he also came to the conclusion that there were actual materials that the government and private sector had in their possession. This is Harry Reid, okay? Now, the same Times article, the astrophysicist Eric Davis, who consulted with the Pentagon's original UFO program and now works for the defense contractor Aerospace Corporation, said that after he examined certain materials, he came to the conclusion that, and I quote, "We couldn't make them ourselves." In fact, Davis briefed a Department of Defense agency recently as March about retrieving materials from off-world vehicles not made on the Earth. Now, the UAPTF will investigate matters like these as long as President Donald Trump doesn't veto a 2021 National Defense Authorization Act. That's the NDAA. That's the annual bill that sets up the budget for the U.S. military. Funding for the UAPTF is in the military budget. Okay, waiting for President Trump's signature. Now, the NDAA, which must be passed and signed before Congress adjourns on January 3rd, includes appropriations for fiscal 2021 for the UAPTF and supports its effort to reveal any links that UAPs have to adversarial foreign governments and pose a threat to U.S. military assets and installation. Now remember what government officials said. Look, we don't know what these are. We can't control them. We can't beat them. So we need to find out what they are, because if they're owned by the Chinese or the Russians, we're in trouble because we can't compete against these. If they're from another world, we need to find that out too. Now, as for other UAP-related events this year, back in April, the U.S. Navy officially released 3 previous leaked videos taken by Navy pilots that indeed show UAPs. But the service also said the footage should have never been released to the public in the first place. Now, that was Commander Favor's Tic Tac UFO footage, which I did a podcast on as well. The Pentagon released those videos in order to clear up any misconceptions by the public on whether or not the footage had been circulating was real, or that whether or not there was more to the videos. That's according to a spokesman in Popular Mechanics. So the Tic Tac UFO videos, that was on the West Coast. These photos on the East Coast. And there really is government funding for an agency to investigate this stuff. If it's all baloney, if it's all hokey, if it's all hooey, why is the government willing to spend so much time and money on it? And why would someone like Harry Reid talk about how this stuff is real? Fascinating to me, folks. Fascinating, dear listeners. Story number 3 comes from an interesting part of the world, a part of the world you would never think this stuff would come from. Zimbabwe in southern Africa. Used to be called Rhodesia once upon a time, okay? And actually this happened back in 1994, but because it was in a far-flung part of the world, it really didn't get the footage, get the traction that it should have, I think, okay? Now, in the Mail and Guardian, that's a newspaper in the Republic of South Africa, reporter Sean Christie, back in 2014, interviewed one of the a woman now, a child back then, who was a first-hand participant in this close encounter of the third kind back in 1994 at a private school called the Aerial School, okay? Now, Christie was tracking down one of the Aerial School's experiencers. It took some doing, he said, but he finally connected with Sarah in a Rhodesian bar in downtown Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe. They call it a Rhodesian bar because it's kind of an old school bar, okay? Kind of where the white folks still hang out. Now, Sarah is not her real name. He changed her name because she requested that he do so. Now, of the more than 110 children and staff who had been at this school, which sits just outside of the small agricultural center of Ruwa, when the aliens landed in 1994, Sarah thought that she was probably the only one that was still in the country. Everyone's gone off to Canada or the UK or died. Because remember what's gone on in Zimbabwe since 1994, actually since the 1980s. When it became clear to her drinking buddies that we were going to talk about UFOs, eyes began to roll. Christ, not ETs again, somebody muttered. She ignored them. What do you want to know, she asked Christie. Actually, it'll be simpler if I just talk about it. What happened? Okay, 62 kids between the ages of 6 and 12 saw the aliens land and get out of their little ships. This is Sarah talking, okay? When the kids returned to class, they were completely freaked out and could not stop nattering about little men who looked like Michael Jackson. The teachers told them to shut up, as teachers do, and the class proceeded. But the next day, the school received a bunch of phone calls from parents wanting to know why their kids were spooked. It got so that the teachers started to freak out too, and a local UFO expert named Cynthia Hind was invited to speak to everyone. It was via her, I think, that we heard about a famous psychiatrist, shrink in her words, who was coming from the U.S. to assess the children. Dr. John Mack. Yes, that Dr. John Mack, the dedicated investigator. Now, the original investigator, Cynthia Hind, who died in 2000, had publicly acknowledged her own experiences with otherworldly beings in the past and had dedicated the past decade and a half to her life investigating UFOs on the African continent on behalf of the African